If we crumble every time we're given a right hook, we're just going to stay down. We're never going to get back up. We're never going to live the life that we were intended to.
Good afternoon, good day, good evening. I don't know what time you're listening or where you're listening from. It's your boy, your host, NaRon Tillman, and you are with me for another episode of Walk in Victory. Speaking of victory, walk.
Warning, this is a public service announcement. The Walk in Victory podcast is where we have conversations purposed to evolve lives. You may not want to evolve. Then tune into another bleeping podcast. Everyone else, enjoy the show. And here's our host.
Good afternoon, good day, good evening. I don't know what time you're listening and or where you're listening from. It's your boy, your host, NaRon Tillman, and you are with me for another victory of Walk in Victory. It's another episode, another victory of Walk in Victory as I prepare myself for this interview. Most of the time, people think that rabbit's foots or crosses, or coincidence, little luck, little salt, little pepper. Oh man, that person is lucky. They got this, they got that. Oh man, that person is lucky. I want to challenge that a little bit in our conversation today. It's really going to talk about people who are really prepared. It's a difference. Opportunity knock on your door and you're not prepared, then it is when you're prepared and an opportunity coincidentally come knocking at your door. Now, the question is it luck or is it that my preparedness attracted it to me? A lot of times people set goals or do things, but they don't set actions. But the action is the preparedness in order to reach the goal. Like me, I have in my trusty wallet my list of things that I'm going to accomplish. Right, and I keep it in my wallet. I hold it up. I look at it. First thing is read this, flip it over. I read this. Now I open it. I read more, and it starts from a small, bite-sized chunk, and it's larger. And I read things 2-3 times a day, memorize them, and think about it. But I'm not just memorizing and thinking about it and talking about it like our podcast will be one of the top 1% podcasts. Right? So how do I prepare for that? I got a podcast like I'm already here. But how are you going to get there if you're not showing up? And a lot of times people don't like to prepare. They want the opportunity to just come and then they want to go fix themselves for the opportunity. There's a great book that talks about 10 potential brides, and they had these lamps, and some of them had oil in the lamp because they were out in the desert field or wherever they were, but it was dark, and they were waiting for suitors. And those who heard the call of the suitors, their potential husbands, they were prepared. They had oil for the lamp, and they were able to go find their way to the voices. And then you had the others that didn't have any oil. That's right. They didn't get no husband. Now some would say, oh, they lucky they brought extra oil. Or they prepared for their journey. Our guest today, we're going to talk about what's the difference between being prepared and what it looks like to be prepared. Because I also think that the challenge is that some people think that they're prepared. They're not willing to go that extra step. They're not willing to go that extra mile. Like, I'm going to use another story or synonym or whatever. Football season is coming. You've been out since January. Your team didn't make the playoffs. You have to make weight. And you come in and the coach says, you can't make weight. You're out of shape. You can't come to camp trying to get in the shape. Just you're going to get hurt. You have to come prepared. And I didn't really do too much. I didn't do as an athlete. You have to be prepared on another level. And a lot of times we think that the bare minimum is enough. Like it's not just enough for me to sit down and write on my little piece of paper, fold it up in a nice little bun and put it in my pocket and never read it again, or never take action towards it, and never start to cross out when I'm getting closer, or start to feel a sense of transformation towards the goals that I have in front of me. And then not to have so many goals that I can't even see the fact that I'm accomplishing things and I'm knocking things off that I can't stop to appreciate it. That's about being okay. Helene, I was trying to say, can you help me again?
Helene,
Helene, I was trying to right. Helene, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. If you don't mind, you can tell our audience a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do.
Well, I'm best known as the Preparedness Pro. I help people live better, more fulfilling, more peaceful, calm-centered lives by being prepared for life's curveballs,
Mm.
whether that is an extended job loss, or it is a weather crisis, or that's what I do. I teach 10 principles of preparedness. All the principles go in an order of prioritization. And I consult with clients to help their level of preparedness for life.
So you heard my little rant at the beginning. You're the expert, and we sit out people at the feet of the masters. What would you say? What would you critique or expound on some of the things that I pointed out?
Well, I think that ultimately the first principle of preparedness is what I call spiritual preparedness.
Yeah.
And that's where your core value system is. That's what's going to determine how you respond in any situation. So for example, like the example you gave about, maybe somebody's lucky they get a certain job. They they they're not they're not lucky, but if they don't have that fundamental value system, then how they handle that new job and thus the consequences of how they handle it are going to follow them. So, for example, let's say somebody's working with me and they decide I want her position come heck or high water. And they do some untoward things in order to get that position. Well, that's not going to last. It's going to bite them on the butt at some point. That's what a self-reliant lifestyle does. It's made of common sense, fundamental principles. And so to have your spiritual preparedness in place first and foremost, because that's all you've got sometimes. Talk to the people who endured Hurricane Helene. They may have had food storage out the wazoo and a generator and firearms and bullets and everything, that you could think of as a so-called prepper. But when they lost everything to the flooding and the winds, guess what? The only thing they had left was their spiritual preparedness and their mental preparedness. And that's going to determine how they plunge forward and live their life in spite of those obstacles.
Yeah, obstacles will definitely come, and you need to have something that you can lean on. So
Yeah.
that's the first thing that you help people to understand, that in the midst of getting prepared, you're gonna have obstacles. Besides the spiritual preparedness, what are some of the other tangible tools that someone who sits down with you need to really focus in?
Well, the second principle is mental preparedness, and that includes knowledge, education, but it also includes mental fortitude. To not crumble when a crisis comes. We've all seen the movies where you've got the spineless coward and he ends up making it vulnerable for everybody else around him because he's so spineless and he makes the wrong decisions.
Mhm.
That's because that character is lacking in mental fortitude. And when we lack in that mental fortitude and we crumble, like you said, the curveballs, the challenges, they are going to come. That is the nature of being human. And I believe that it's to make us stronger. And if we crumble every time we're given a right hook, we're just going to stay down. We're never going to get back up. We're never going to live the life that we were intended to. So gathering skills and knowledge, and then that will help to strengthen that mental fortitude, knowing, you know what, I can do this. I got all these books behind me because they're all sales and marketing books. I'm a sales and marketing geek. But if I never delved into them or read them, they're not doing me diddly squat. They're just things that I check off on a list. But because I delve into it, I practice what I learn, et cetera, I've got the mental fortitude to know, you know what, throw me any project, I can handle the marketing of it. No ifs, ands, or buts. That's the way life is if we give ourselves the education, if we feed our minds, then we're going to be able to handle those curveballs. The third principle of preparedness is physical. We've got to be able to handle the physical durations, whether it is being able to physically hike 30 miles back home because your car broke down, or whether it's about physical protection, or it's about keeping your body in shape so that you can handle the curveballs like those at you that may be taxing on your body as well.
It's funny, like these principles are going to helping someone to get prepared. But I want to ask you, when did you know that you can be a coach to help people get prepared? What was going on?
When I lived in the Philippines
Oh, wow.
for about a year and a half, and seeing the vulnerabilities there, I realized how much I'd taken for granted that my mom had raised me. I just kind of took it for granted, the things that she taught me. But after living in a third world nation and seeing how those applications and those principles of the things that she taught me would help the people of that nation, and oh my gosh, they're the happiest people on the planet. Don't get me wrong. They are some of the most giving, kind, generous, and happy people I've ever met. But the vulnerabilities that they live with, it can be controlled. It can be overcome. And after living in that environment for a year and a half, I came back home and I was much more aware of principles that I needed to adopt more in full. Fast forward to about 2008, I asked myself, if I could do anything, what would I do? If money was no object whatsoever, what would I do? And I realized that at my core, I wanted to help people live better lives that are able to deal with the curveballs. I'd lived through plenty of curveballs in my life. It would make a interesting little movie, I'm sure. But I realized that I had something of value to give, and the experience has proven that out over the last 20 years.
Yeah, but to choose the word out of everything that you could have described what it is that you help a person do, why did you choose the word to prepare? I help prepare. Because
Well, to be honest with you, that word is used over and over and over. And oh, by the way, it's used over and over again in the Bible. And prepare ye, prepare ye, prepare ye.
Mhm.
And so that's why preparedness became my mantra. I mean, self-reliance is another way of explaining it. I mean, there's so many people nowadays that are completely codependent. I mean, if there's no microwave, they don't eat. Or if there's no DoorDash, they don't eat. Did you know after Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton, the most common search for term was what fast food joints are open now? Because people did not know how to cook a can of beans, for crying out loud, and they didn't have it. They didn't do anything to prepare for, hey, there might come a time when the food isn't just going to magically appear on your doorstep.
And we raise a generation now, this new generation of people who don't understand currency, swipe a card, so they don't see it leaving. They just think it reappears. They order something and push the button and it comes to the door. So there's no real, what values are we passing down for preparedness? That can come back to bite us down the line, but that's a whole conversation today. When we find adults not willing to be accountable, to be prepared, and become excuse makers, it's always someone else's fault. Where in your value system, where do you talk about, or what is it that you say about concerning accountability?
That's right there in the first principle. I have to be accountable for how my life turns out.
Yeah.
I can do my best and let God take care of the rest, but doing my best is the first step. When I raised my children, for example, I don't have any children, and not to mislead anyone, I wish I did. But when I help raise my nieces and nephews, I have to realize that in every way that I do, that I interact with them, there's a ripple effect. And is that ripple effect making them responsible, contributory adults in the future? Or is it them growing up to just be another mouth to feed, another crisis in the making? There's a ripple effect, and that accountability starts with square one. That's the accountability. That's the value system that says, I'm going to be responsible for how my life turns out.
When you decided that you wanted to do this as an entrepreneur to help other people, what was the goal at the time, and then how has it evolved over time?
Well, initially the goal was a little bit more, let's say, superficial. It wasn't about money, but it was more about a checklist. And obviously, I realized earlier on, thank goodness, that it's not a checklist of things, it's a lifestyle.
Mm.
I have to look at everything around me and go, okay, how am I accountable for that happening? Things happen to us that we don't have any control over, but we still have an accountability of how we respond to those things.
Yeah, being accountable for how we respond. So you sit down now and you say, I'm going to write this book, because the best way to show credibility is to have something that you can point towards. When you started to write the principles and started to think about or formulate and craft this work of art, what were some of the things that you left off? Or did you add everything that you heard?
No, I definitely had to delete things off. Amazon only lets you publish 550 pages. So
Preparedness Part 2.
yeah, there's definitely a preparedness part 2 in me. I wrote a 505-page book just on one of the 10 principles of preparedness. I did go into all 10 principles in the book, but only on a more surface level, so that people could see where the principle I was teaching them about, where it fit into the whole scheme of things. I love to cook, and that's my love language to other people, is making things for them. And I love eating good food and things of that nature, but I still have to be accountable to myself. So I'll still work out, or I'll still do intermittent fasting, or, what have you. But the book that I wrote was primarily about that principle of preparedness, about food preparedness, which out of 10 principles of preparedness, that's number 8 in the order of prioritization. So I didn't want people thinking, oh, I'm going to be prepared. And what that really meant was have a whole bunch of freeze-dried food, because that's not what being prepared is. It's a lifestyle of accountability and self-sufficiency. But so I taught about the 10 principles in that book, but the book itself is on the food preparedness so that people could learn how to do things on their own. I once had an employee who didn't even know where pickles came from. She wanted to know what plant pickles came from. And and I'm afraid that we're growing more and more adults who don't know where pickles come from, or butter, that it's made from cream. And so I teach a lot of things that you can do on your own, but I tell people I'm one of the laziest preparedness person you'll know. If there is an easier way to do something, I'm going to find it. I'm going to do it.
Well,
So I provide a lot of easy ways to do things too in the book.
let's talk about that, how being prepared can actually optimize your life and make your life a little bit easier. The
Yeah.
struggle on the hardest part of being prepared is getting prepared, the foundational stuff, where you have to really start to build in your systems. But once those systems are there, what tends to happen?
Well, one thing leads to another. I have discovered that once somebody starts realizing that they need to be accountable for their life and what happens to them, and not to rely on the government, and not to rely on mom and dad to always be there to bail them out. You've got 50-year-olds still living at home with mom and dad. And once that accountability is established, then there's a beautiful ripple effect. It snowballs, and all of a sudden, oh, I need to be responsible for whether or not somebody's going to break into my house. So I'm going to lock the door every time I come inside.
Mm.
Or I need to be responsible for the fact that nowadays a person's going to end up changing their career 3.5 times on average. And so that means that they have to continue to pursue them, getting additional knowledge in their field of expertise so that they can pivot if that need arises. And according to history and the going on, we're to pivot because things are moving so quickly. So it's a beautiful snowball effect. One thing leads to another. It's not just about food preparedness. It's about physical preparedness. It's about financial preparedness. All of a sudden going, hey, I don't want to get caught with my pants down next time I have a big repair on my car. I'm going to start having a 6-month of reserve in my bank account. That's another thing that we as Americans especially are terrible about, and that's savings. Savings for everyday, emergencies.
We look at how much does fear stop people from getting prepared? Because the fear of the unknown,
Yeah.
sometimes the fear can be
Paralyzing.
paralyzing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And people,
Yeah.
they know they need to do something, but they just don't know what to do. What say ye, Miss Preparedness Coach, about that?
I am a big advocate for people to not prepare based on fear. You've got people out there that are the doom and gloomers and, oh my gosh, we're going to have an EMP or we're going to have Third World War. And I'm not saying that those kind of things are impossible, but I have come to discover that if you are prepared for the everyday life happenings,
Doesn't matter what.
then the big crises won't be a big crisis.
Mm. Yeah,
I think fear is paralyzing, like we said, and it doesn't come from a good place. It never comes from a good place.
I was watching it in the event. I don't want to do it that way. I'm trying to think of the way that I want to. And they was selling end time food. And to me, these were religious leaders using fear to people that listened to them. And they had these barrels of beans and rice and all of this stuff, and they're like selling it for like thousands of dollars. I'm like, what's happening here? Because people will play on other people's fear. And they're like, oh, you prepared because the apocalypse is coming and this is coming and that's coming. I'm like, whoa. And me sitting there watching this, I'm like, people really believe this? Yes, some people really do believe that stuff.
Yes, they do. I cross swords with them often, and I'm not saying that you don't need even a year's supply of pantry. I mean, but don't do it out of fear. Do it very deliberately because you know what you're doing. Don't just spend $5,000 on a whole bunch of food that you're never going to touch. You're just going to stock away in the attic. That's irresponsible. We're not squirrels. Instead, when you go to the grocery store and you're buying up the ingredients for that amazing taco soup, buy a little more and put it in your pantry. Have what you actually will eat and then eat what you actually have. Those are my rules. I don't believe in doing this fear-based nonsense.
And it's funny because when we see how these messages perpetuate, it actually hinders forward progress because we're subconsciously waiting for this thing to happen because everyone wants to land on the right side of the track, right? So every little thing that happens, see, I told you it's happening. I told you it's happening. And it's hard to live in the present when you're constantly looking for
looking around dark corners, looking for the boogeyman.
Yeah. So how do you help people who may have experienced that and that's their worldview? What are some of the words of comfort that you can give to them to help them get on the track of getting out of the mindset of waiting for the other shoe to drop or looking around the corner or looking for the next conspiracy and just really getting on with life and just being prepared for whatever life throws at you?
Well, I teach rape prevention for women and I teach firearm self-defense for women. So I'm used to people coming to me initially because they're scared. What I don't want to have happen though is I don't want them to leave me because there's, and take advantage of what I have to do just because they're scared. So the mental fortitude really comes into play here. They need to realize what the realities are, but they will have a less fear by actually being prepared. Having a woman know that she can have options for life in general. You know that if you, instead of falling down and withering away because you were thrown a curveball, if you stand up to it and fight back with your preparedness, with your self-reliance mindset, with that accountability mindset, then you'll know the next time you get thrown a curveball, you'll go, oh, wait, I've seen that ball before. I know how to hit this thing.
Yeah.
And that is what I'm all about, is having people have a peace-filled preparedness approach to life.
I like the way that you referred to it as an equalizing tool. It won't level the playing field.
Gosh.
Equalizing tool. When you talk about levels of preparedness, you run the gamut.
I do. I run the gamut.
Like, after you fix these tacos, we're going to go out back and shoot some pumpkin.
Right.
Made you realize, because it's one thing to be able to do it, to say, all right, I'm going to use the word prepared. This is the content by which I'm going to teach. And I'm pretty sure you've been at it for a while. It is constantly evolving, even with now with AI and all the things that we have. So your level of teaching is always going to be in front of you because the society is moving at a fast pace. So it's not like you're going to run out of content. But when did you realize that you were good?
I think there's been a couple of times, like just recently, I got an email from someone who endured Hurricane Helene. And she said, I just want you to know my husband and I are okay, and it's thanks to you. And I had another situation where I was teaching a rape prevention class. And instead of it being a fear-filled class, it was more nurturing. And because of that environment, a daughter felt safe enough to finally tell her mom something that she had endured. And the mom and the daughter came up to me at the end of the class and shared their experience with me. That tells me I did it right. Instead of it being a fear-based, everybody tensed up and scared of what might come at them, it was much more nurturing and empowering.
How equal is empowerment and preparedness? Are they cousins? Are they twins?
Oh, yeah.
Are they sisters and brothers?
Yeah, they're definitely related.
They're
They're definitely related. Yeah, because I'll give you an example. I can be friendly, but I wasn't necessarily comfortable being friendly with people who were a little off. And you could tell that they were a little off. But I noticed a couple years ago, I sat down at a Costco food court and I was eating. And this gal came up to me and she was a little off. But she asked if she could sit with me. And I wasn't cringing. I wasn't uncomfortable in any way, shape, or form. She sat down with me. I told her that was fine. And we had a full-on conversation. And I went home that day and I realized how far I'd come because I was able to have that conversation with her because there was no fear in me. There was no lack of comfort. I was comfortable in my own skin and who I was and what I was ready for or not ready for, whether it be an emotional maturity level or a physical maturity level. And I was able to have a great conversation with this person. So it is always evolving.
And that's and empowerment and preparedness are in the same family. Important is vulnerability, because like what you just did right there was a real vulnerable moment. As the teacher, sometimes the teacher don't want to share those vulnerable moments. Sometimes the teacher wants to keep those.
To be honest with you, I think it eliminates vulnerability because I didn't feel vulnerable. I felt completely empowered to have a human-centered conversation with this person. She deserved that. The people who wouldn't want to sit next to her and talk to her are people who are afraid, who are, well, I don't know what this person's going to do to me. Is she going to go ballistic? Is she going to go crazy? But instead, I didn't feel vulnerable. I felt strong and centered and at peace.
When I say vulnerable, like sharing this story right now, like, because
Oh, I
even,
see.
even the fact of how you felt before, like having conversations with people who were suffering in that way, like that's a real vulnerable uh, story to share, or a vulnerable part of yourself or your own personal worldview that you had to overcome. And some people may look at you and be like, oh, I never knew that of you. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I don't think that I have time for pretense. There's too much for me to learn. There's way too much for me to learn. I don't have time for that nonsense.
So it's after
And
learning.
if somebody, yeah, it's heck with that.
Wow, but that's such. Do you think that attitude comes from the sense that you spend so much time thinking about how to prepare to be prepared that you have to let some
Yeah.
things go? You can't have, oh, Susie said this about me yesterday, and Bob didn't show. Like you develop this muscle to help cut the fat, so to say. Was it always like that?
No, I definitely had to grow into that person, but that spiritual preparedness and the mental preparedness, they're your twins, we'll
Mm,
say. They go hand in hand together, and it makes me almost feel, oh, what's the word? I'm not as fragile. And so when you're not fragile, kids are like that. Kids are just naturally inquisitive, and they don't think, well, I must be an idiot if I ask dad why. They would never think of themselves that way. They're just very strong and who they are because the world hasn't beat them up just yet. And I think that's because they come from a strong place spiritually and mentally. They haven't been conditioned by the world yet to ask themselves, wait, am I even allowed to ask this question? And so I get to be naturally curious when I get to come from a place of strength and peace. And so I get to learn more. And the more I learn, the more strong and centered and invincible I feel.
So, last few questions. When you talk about that peace part or that mindset shift, how much of being prepared has to do with how we imagine life, how one sees life, and they're becoming like that child again, where imagination is boundless, juxtaposed to seeing all of the things that I can't do. We start to really imagine all the things that we can do and start to prepare for our best life. How much is imagination centered into preparedness or creativity?
Well, that's a great question. I feel like imagination is important for mental fortitude, but I'm always telling people to imagine what would they do in this situation or what would they do in that situation. But I've never really thought of it from the perspective that you're coming at it from. But I would imagine that, that it's very closely connected. I think that ability to be limitless and knowing that there's always a counter move.
Mm,
Evil has their moves, but there's always a counter move. And guess what? Good wins.
I like that. There's always accountable. Guys, you heard it here first from Kellene. And I'm going to add that to my repertoire. The first couple of times I'm going to say I got it from you. And then there's going to, I'm going to use that thing. Like I thought of it. My last question for you is, what books have impacted you, influenced you? You have plenty of books behind you that if you were talking to someone and you was giving a master class and you started to recommend some books that you would name them, and it could be fiction and nonfiction.
Wow. I'm a bit of a book junkie. So that's a really hard question to ask me because it's like, well, which of my babies do I value the most? And this is just my sales and marketing library. It's not my preparedness library.
Sure.
It's not my religious library. And, I think that any book which speaks truth to your heart
Great answer.
and helps you push yourself is the right book to read. I love Stephen Covey. Everybody tends to know who Stephen Covey is, but from his business approach. But he wrote this great book called Spiritual Roots of Human Relations.
Mm,
And enabled me to see people as spiritual beings first rather than, physical beings, seeing that they're a spirit in a body first and foremost, and everything they've got going on with that. And it really enabled me to see people very differently because of that book.
There you have it, everyone. We told you we set you at the feet of the masses, and you just had a masterclass in preparedness today. Listen, all of the information that you need to get that clarity code, to get the book, is in the description. But right now, what we did was, so we can make it easier, is the title has a line through it. That line is where you can click and you go right to the website. And from that website, you can get our guest information and all of that there. But not only did we do that, we didn't stop there. We have a website, walkinvictory.me, where our guests have their own landing page. These landing pages there, all of her social handles, if you want to get into the ecosystem of what it is that she shares daily with the rest of the world. You can go follow her on her social media, and set up that clarity call, get the book, do whatever you have to do to prepare yourself. Don't wait till that house burns down to get insurance. It's too late. Get insurance now. Don't walk with your head down. Don't walk making excuses. We don't ask you for Venmo, Zells, or any of those things. We do ask that you hit subscribe. If this is your first time and you made it this far, you might as well subscribe to the podcast. If you're listening on the platform, last thing, that allows you to give a review, give us that 5-star review, or go to our website and give us a review there, and join our mail list so that you will be the first to get every episode that we produce and publish. Enjoy the rest of your day. Peace. Thank you. That was awesome.